The Jonah Complex. Here it comes. Now, just to familiarize us with the story of Jonah, this was like one tiny part of a bigger narrative. And this is the action part, right? So this is the part of Jonah's story where things really get ugly and he's at the bottom of the depths. But the way the story goes is that God calls Jonah to go to a place called Nineveh and preach the message of God. Jonah doesn't want to go. So he runs away, and he ends up in this situation where he's on the stormy sea and he gets tossed overboard. Then there's a whale, and he gets spewed out from the whale. And anyway, he ends up going to Nineveh. That's the end of the story. Which brings me to what we're going to focus on today, which is Nineveh. We're just going to focus on this one little piece of the story, the city of Nineveh, and what that all means. So, really, when we're talking about Nineveh, we're talking about a place that in this story has been characterized as having like a different set of like social behavioral norms. Do you know what I mean when I talk about social behavioral norms? The stuff that just you take for granted in society, and it kind of makes up the way that we all behave with each other. And when you change the social behavioral norms, it just gets weird. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. So here's some examples of violating the norm. You ready? Simple one, walking on the wrong side of the sidewalk. You're supposed to walk on the right side of the sidewalk so that you can pass each other right, but if you walk on the left side, then you just get in everybody's way. Yes? Okay. Have an animated conversation with yourself in public. Violating a social norm. Wear your clothes backwards. Yeah? Have you ever put on a t-shirt backwards by accident and everybody all day long, hey, your shirt's on backwards? Yeah, you're violating a social norm. Whisper when you talk. Yell when you talk. There's Seinfeld episodes on both of those. Violating social norms. Ask strangers if you can cut in line, and if they ask why you need to, then you say you don't really feel like waiting for very long. Or these are like per different situations in life. This one's for the bathroom. Don't flush when you're done. That's violating a social norm, y'all. I'm just saying. Elevators. Talk to strangers in the elevator. Or walk in and just face the back of the elevator. That's weird. Oh, yeah. Push buttons for floors that you don't intend to get off at. That is violating a serious social norm. Or stand right next to someone even though you're the only two people in the elevator. That works for airplanes too. You know, when the airplane is mostly empty and somebody comes and sits in your row even though there's an empty row right there, violating a social norm. Here's a few more. Eat dessert first. We had a friend... That's not wrong. Yeah, that should be a social norm, right? We had a friend in Chicago who that was his thing. He loved cookies, and he'd have cookies before dinner. Yeah, I don't know. Walk through the drive-thru, or in the case of Queen Creek, ride your horse through the drive-thru. Drive backwards through the drive-thru. Or when you're at a restaurant, ask for substitutions, even when it says no substitutions. Yeah. Okay, guilty. Say goodbye when you answer the phone, or say hello when you're hanging up the phone. or this one's good. Say I love you when you're ending a conversation, even with friends and strangers. Last one. Ask telemarketers if you can call them back. Yeah. It's all about social norms and social behaviors, which brings us to Nineveh. And so I ask myself, what do we actually know about Nineveh? Like, what was the social norm there that was so objectionable and so different from what Jonah knew? Nineveh is known as a terrible, awful place. Terrible place where they do terrible things. In fact, there's another passage in the book of Nahum, in chapter 1. It says, you will have no descendants, talking to the people of Nineveh. You will have no descendants to bear your name. I will destroy the images and idols that are in the temple of your gods. So they're breaking commandments. That's bad. And I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. Vile. That's going pretty far. It's pretty bad in Nineveh. So, you know, you can picture a place that might be dangerous to go to. You know, like you watch your wallet. right, when you're in Nineveh. There might be houses of ill repute in Nineveh. It's kind of the survival of the fittest, and I'd say maybe like selfishness is at an all-time high in Nineveh. So you got the picture. This is what Nineveh is. And the book of Jonah, when it's talking about Nineveh, book of Jonah is written during or after, they're not really sure, the Babylonian exile. Now this is significant as we're like painting a picture of what Nineveh is. So here's a map, because I love visuals. It like helps me understand what's going on. So here's a map of the time in which roughly Jonah was written. And what happened was the Babylonians invaded Judah and Israel and kicked out all the Jews, sent them into exile. So they were used to, for generations and generations, living over here. And they were, all in one area, and everybody was like them. And so the culture was all this one thing. And then they got scattered out into Babylon, way over here. And they had to live in separate communities and away from their temple and away from all sacred ground and anything that they'd ever known. And so they actually ended up having to create like new habits and new ways of worship. And that was, this is a side note, that was actually maybe the birth of synagogues, because they weren't near the temple. And so they had to have another place of worship. So everything changed. And while they were in Babylon, they just felt like everything around them was foreign, and everything around them was, bad, because it wasn't what they were used to. And they spent, depending on what scholars you listen to, anywhere from about 50 years to 70 years in exile. And if you take into account the shortened life expectancy of the time, we're talking maybe as many as 4 generations that lived in exile. So now you have people who have never even seen their homeland, have never lived near a temple. Not that they could now, because the temple's destroyed. It's not even there. But do you understand what I'm saying? So when they think about Nineveh, and Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, it's the capital of everything that has taken them out of their homeland, the capital of everything that is bad and evil and out to get them. That's where God asked Jonah to go. No Jew wants to go to Nineveh. No one. So I started to think, what would be our Nineveh today? I mean, you can think geographically about this. There's a lot of places in the world that we could say have just gone wild, have gone crazy. But what if it's not necessarily a geographical place? What if today's Nineveh is online? Our online culture. When you think about the interactions that have started to form and the attitude that has just gone completely downhill in our online culture, I'd say that is today's Nineveh. So there was an article in Time magazine, I think it was this week's edition, where they're talking about how the online culture has been completely turned over to hate. Now, that's a generalized statement, but you can kind of see where that's based. So a couple of quotes that I pulled out of there. One is that psychologists call this online disinhibition, that's a big word, disinhibition effect, in which factors like anonymity, invisibility, a lack of authority, and not communicating in real time, so you have like all the time in the world to formulate that really good comeback, right? They strip away the mores of society that we have spent millennia building. And it's seeping from our smartphones into every aspect of our lives. So there was a Pew Research study that came out a couple of years ago that said that 70% of young adults, so they were just looking at age 18 to 24, who are online, who are using the internet, had experienced some form of harassment. 70%. Some form of harassment. And 26% of the women who responded that age said they'd been stalked online. Yeah, except that online we don't call it stalking anymore. There's a word for it. Have you heard of trolls? Online trolls? Okay, when I think of a troll, I think of this. first. And then maybe I think of this. Where's the next one? That's funny. Oh, no, wait. Is there one more? The cute one. There it is. Then I think of this. Yeah, but it's somewhere in the middle. Okay, you can go back to the one with the words. All right. So online trolls, these are people who are like purposely looking. They're just picking a fight, right? So they're looking for threads. They're looking for people who have shown vulnerability, and they just want to pounce on it and exploit it for the world to see and to get more people to jump on the troll bandwagon. Troll make internet mad. Troll like anger. Troll want people as miserable as troll. And really, that's the bottom line. So we'll see as we keep talking that really people who are doing the trolling, there's something else going on in their life. Actually, they did some studies on like how a person becomes a troll, I guess you would say. And so there are people out there who are self-professed trolls. It's now somewhat of a badge of honor to be a troll. But then they also took the people who were self-professed trolls and did like psychological testing on them and found out that they have other traits like narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and especially sadism. So there's some other stuff going on, but they really only found that in about 5% of the people who profess themselves to be trolls. So how is it, if that number is so small, of people who are psychologically disposed to some other condition, if that number is so small, how come trolling is so prevalent online? In fact, trolls are turning the web into a cesspool of aggression and violence. It's taking over the attitude that we have with one another online, and it's affecting the way that we treat one another in real life. If I said to you, who are you going to call? You'd say, yeah! Okay, so Ghostbusters did a remake, right? And this remake, instead of 4 dudes, it's 4 chicks. All right, this was a problem for some people. And so there's this backlash even before the movie comes out, and there was all kinds of talk on social media and attacks on the actresses who are in this movie. And as far as I can tell, I mean, I looked up as much as I could, but as far as I can tell, all they did was act in a movie. I don't think it was like an activism thing. Right? But then there were all kinds of attacks, especially on the black woman who was in the movie, Leslie Jones. Attacks on her personally, on her character, on her physical well-being. It's so much so that one of her attackers got banned from Twitter completely, permanently, forever. It's kind of a big thing. This is trolling. This is the attitude that's taking over. And it's happening on so many levels. It's not just on a national level, although it is. It's happening in our presidential campaign, right? None of us are immune to it. It seems like it's left everybody without any sort of middle ground. We're being polarized as a society. It's happening in our local elections. I don't know if you've noticed, there's a lot of signs this year. A lot of signs this year. And it's happening even on a personal level. My kids come home from school. Graham, he's 4. He's in preschool. But the kids come home from school receiving almost like sensitivity training, you could call it, about bullying. Because it's the most prevalent problem in our society, and it's not just with our kids. And we all need tools to help stand up for one another and speak out on these kinds of issues. It happens all the time. Everywhere. It's pervasive. In fact, you might even say that the online culture is our culture. It's not, we can't separate it anymore. So the story of Jonah is written in a particular literary style. It's a satire. So a satire is, it's made to be funny. It's entertaining, but it also comments on an issue of the time. It uses humor, irony, exaggeration. So sometimes a satire takes the form of like a caricature. It's just bigger than life. And it's used to ridicule or expose or criticize people's stupidity or vices, particularly in a context of contemporary politics or other issues. So in this case, in the story of Jonah, the Bible is getting political. It's commenting on the political reality of the time. So some modern examples of a satire might be something like The Daily Show, The Colbert Report, The Onion, if you read The Onion online, or if you're on Twitter. Have you heard of Unvirtuous Abbey? Oh, it's funny. That's a commentary on church status and God in the world. That's a good one. Have you heard the song Gangnam Style? Gangnam Style? Yeah, okay. This is a satire. I didn't know that. It's a satire. So Gangnam is a neighborhood in Seoul, Korea that's really wealthy. And kind of some of the lyrics in the song talk about noble in the daytime and crazy at the nighttime, describing people who live in this neighborhood. So it's a commentary, it's a satire making fun of like the rich and famous in Korea. I had no idea. Example of satire. The story of Jonah is such a satire that we can caricaturize it with just 2 words. Jonah, whale. It's really easy to draw a picture and you get the story, right? It's been simplified, it's exaggerated. But really, Jonah is just a man of faith who is struggling to make sense of God's actions and God's desire of what he should do. This is the same as we look at those who are in exile. So in the time that Jonah was written, they're asking, God, how can this be happening? Like, why have we been exiled? And they assume that it's because they're sinful people. They've done something wrong, and so God is punishing them. But then they go and they live in Babylon for several generations, and they look at the people around them, and they say, you know what? We're not doing so bad. Because all these people around us, they're just as bad as us, nay, worse than us. So clearly, the reason that we're being punished cannot be that we're so bad. But then they don't want to make God mad, and so they say, okay, maybe it's not us. Maybe it's the generations before us that messed up. And so we're paying for the sins of the generations before. That must be why we're exiled. But then they start to ask some of those tough questions that we find ourselves asking. If that's true, then is there nothing we can do to change the future? Are we always going to be stuck in whatever path that's laid out before us? I had a crazy week this week, which included another clergy woman from another conference who called me and said, my son, who was 40, died over the weekend. Would you please do a funeral? She called me on Tuesday. We did the funeral on Thursday. It was one of those crazy weeks where these questions were so prevalent. If there's just this path laid out in front of us, how could we ever be faithful, or how could we ever do anything or make a decision that would make a difference in the world? And so the question, that's the question we were dealing with at the funeral is, why would a 40-year-old die so suddenly and in an accident? And so the question really is, maybe we need to reevaluate God's will. Maybe God's will is not a path. It's not God's will to be in exile. It's not God's will for all these pain and hardships to happen. Maybe God's will is how we walk the path. God's will is how we find the way to come back and, okay, we can go to Nineveh. So what's a Christian to do with the modern day Nineveh? Maybe the answer is no comment. Maybe we hold back, whether it's online or in political discourse face to face. But maybe it's more. There's a thing called counter-trolling now online. And so a good example of that is when I don't know, the media, the public was criticizing Gabby Douglas during the Olympics. Counter-trolling came out very prevalently in that situation. So a bunch of people hopped online and started just flooding the internet with positive messages and building Gabby up. That's counter-trolling. And maybe that's part of the answer of how we are supposed to answer God's call. Maybe we're supposed to flood our relationships, our conversations, our actions with positive messages of love and support. In the end, it's always about changing the behavior norms, though. Changing the behavior norms. In fact, going back to the Time magazine article, there were a couple of examples of people who have experienced online trolling and turned it around. So there's an author named, what is her name? Lindy. I always want to call her Lindsay. Lindy West. There she is. Do you think that maybe people have been critical of her? But I'm saying, look at her. She probably, automatically, you can assume that people are going to be critical of her body. She's written about a lot of these issues that make her vulnerable to the world. And so she's, in turn, experienced a lot of people offering criticism, hatred. In fact, it got so bad at one point when her dad died, someone created fake social media accounts under her dad's name in order to then take those messages of critique and hate and make it seem as if her dad was the one saying all these things about her. So instead of freezing, instead of shutting down and just not saying anything about it, she turned it around and she wrote about that, in particular about the person who did that action and what effect it had on her, and processed it through public writing. And the most amazing thing happened. I can't believe this happened. But her troll contacted her and apologized. And then went on to explain that he wasn't happy with his life and was angry at her for being so pleased with hers. The same thing happened to the author of the Time magazine story. He hunted down his own troll because, he works for Time magazine. He's experienced this firsthand. He has this troll. Her name is Megan, and she's a comedian. I think the next picture is Megan. Maybe not. It's okay. Okay, her name is Megan, and she had been sort of like online stalking him for years and saying all kinds of things just about his writing in general. And then even in one instance, she showed up at one of his real live events and threatened to fight him physically, which was just kind of weird because she's like 5'2" and he's like 6 something. I don't know. But he, in writing this article, decided to ask her out to lunch. So they go out to lunch. And he like chatted with the waiter or something like that. And she looked at him and said, "You're a people person?" Like she had this totally other picture of him in her head. And it just shocked her to find out that he could be relatable and something other than what he had in his head. And she said, I don't know why I have been beating you up for so long. In fact, it's probably just a projection of all the things that I hate about myself that I put on you. And I really should know better since I have trolls of my own, she says. She said, the internet is the realm of the coward. These are people who are all sound and no fury. So God says, get up and go to Nineveh. Go to Nineveh. Don't feed the troll, but hold accountability. Offer friendship and love, and proclaim the message that God tells you. The problem is not that it's just this 5% of people who are, they're crazy. They have problems. They are causing all this hate in the world. The problem is that in some way or another, we are them too. When Jonah goes back to Nineveh and he proclaims God's message to Nineveh, he's saying it to himself as well. So it's time to enter the city and speak the words of God and bring back the norm of love.